All right, I'll call the meeting to order, 7:33. Please, Madam Clerk, call the roll.
Supervisor Schnitzer Eisenberg,
Here.
Trustee McAllen,
Here.
Trustee Robbins,
Here.
Trustee Mosier,
Here.
Trustee Rubin. Here. We have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll now rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We're now in line for public comments. Are there any public comments? Seeing none, we turn to the approval of the minutes from December 14th, 2021. And anyone tell me if you can't hear me anytime. I know that the K95s are serious. All right, so we're at the December 14th. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Assessor Churchwell actually just wants me to make some edits to the minutes. They were just a capitalization and spelling. So they are just edits of that nature. So
Intersection?
in her section.
When you make those, would you also, my name is spelled incorrectly
Oh, sorry about
on
that.
that's okay, on the cover page and then on page 5, I believe.
Get them.
You're gonna be in the document.
Yep.
These are all stylistic grammar changes and spelling.
My puppy was helping me type this time.
Yes, it's very helpful.
Better than eating your homework.
Any other additional discussion on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the minutes as edited, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? It's unanimous. Supervisors reports, there's a lot less to report than last month. That was pretty intense. Continuing to be active with the various chambers of commerce. A few of us were able to attend John Thomas's memorial over the weekend. It was a beautiful remembrance. I think all of us really left with a recognition of his service and it's also of how loved he was. I think that's as you may have noticed, some of the township officials of Illinois and township officials of Cook County events have been postponed. So please be aware that if you were planning on going on Thursday to the trustees meeting, that is moved to February. But otherwise, things are continuing with financial report. Diane.
Okay. And given we have the size of the agenda, I will make this
Yes.
just brief, and I certainly would like to offer Kate at some point. There's a 2-page item that is the standard report, and this is an overview of the total township items, the total township accounts, noting that as of 11/30, which is November 30th, and that represents 9 months of the fiscal year, which is 75% of our operation. The total amount of the town fund was $1,340,233. The general assistance is $1,177,144. This first document just gives an overview of what the activity was, the cash balances, year-to-date assets, as well as the asset balance as of that. Second page represents the exact same information that I presented, but referring to our town fund account. And the next document that I'll just review and touch base on is really a breakdown of that. Is there any questions?
And I'm sorry, the second page is the town
Town,
account?
no, it's for the general assistance.
General assistance. Oh,
It is for our home, emergency assistance, the general assistance. Separate. Okay, moving on to the 4-page document. Just to highlight a couple things, again, noting that it's a 9 months representation for the fiscal year. Our fiscal year ends on the end of February. Just noting that the property tax, and I'll note this for both of the accounts, is sitting at 84%, which is a reasonable and a healthy point at this point. We won't know until the end of February what if we receive all of the dollars that were levied for the township. But as a routine, we usually come in very, very close. It is a timing issue with the county and how the funds are distributed throughout the time. When we have an audit, which we completed, and that what they do is they take that and they allocate it to the correct. Just looking down the first page, nothing to comment other than the fact that we're sitting at 66.67% for all of these agencies. That represents 2 of 3 payments that are made throughout the year. The next and final payment for each of the agencies will come at the end of February, the closing of the account. Second page, what I've done is just to highlight items that really just might jump out. You see different percentages. The reason I'm saying that is in February, at the end of the month of February, we have to prepare a line item transfer. That line item transfer will then be sure to allocate and to calibrate the expenses so that we are not over or over in our budgeted items. Any questions on that? Okay, moving on to page 3.
Sorry, actually, on the town meeting, I see that we have 1,516. Do we put anything down on that? Have we made,
We haven't put any reservation on it.
right, so I'm just confused as to why there's activity in the town meeting.
In the town meeting. Okay, what page are you on?
On page 2, sorry.
On page 2.
Yeah. Middle of the page, annual town meeting.
Why is there?
Why
That's there since last April.
So that's no,
That's a charge that our town meeting takes place in April. And the fiscal year begins in March.
okay, so that's last year's.
No, we're still in the fiscal, we're still in the.
Right,
same
that
year.
makes sense. Okay,
Yeah, remember, this isn't
right.
the next year that we're going in.
You're right there. Okay, that makes more sense. Okay,
I mean, and that's been consistent because that's what takes place
Yes.
in April, and by the time the charges usually come in, it's May.
that makes sense.
Okay, page 3, just briefly looking at that, you might notice that in the staff salaries and the personnel, the social security, the IMRF, et cetera, you see the 94%, 88%. What is included here are dollars that have not been, well, actually in December, I transferred them. Those dollars are transferred once a year. We used to do it more frequently, which it was decided it didn't really make a lot of sense. We just do the transfers. And that represents the salaries, the portion of social security, IMRF, the health insurance that is in our general assistance account that has been transferred to support this operation. So the reduction will come in the month of December. And so I just did some real quick calculations with the dollars, and you'll see these dollars on the 4th page for those particular pages. You'll see that there's a budgeted administration salary. Those dollars have been transferred and refunded back into our account, which would at this point in time, if I had done that in November, it would have been sitting at 72% for the salaries, 64% for the social security, IMRF would be at 62%, and the employee health insurance would be at 66%, which would then put it in line with where we are in this fiscal year. I should note too that the staff salaries are going to be over at this, I'm anticipating, because we did have a new staff person join us in September, the end of September. And those dollars will then be going to those, and that hasn't been allocated.
And the question is, do we have to make a transfer for that, or can the communication salary be placed under communication?
The transfer's been done. I mean, the transfer's been done, and it's a salary issue. And the communications was a contract hire position. But not to mix apples and
Okay, okay, so you're good.
Looking forward in the new fiscal year, in the budgeting process, we can certainly address that.
Perfect.
Last page is the general assistance. Again, that's like the second page. And I would refer to the general assistance account, which is a part of the account. Nothing really to highlight other than just noting the home relief, which is our GA account, is running, I believe, a little higher than last year. The emergency assistance account continues to be ahead of that, just based on the different items and issues that have come up, not only through the pandemic, but just as things go on and the needs go on for people. Overall, we're looking at grand total of revenues sitting at 84% that have been realized, and the total expenses are sitting at 54%. And that's the short version.
Are there any questions about the snapshot?
I got a question on page 1, Diane, on personal property tax replacement tax. And the third column showed as a negative number. Am I reading it right? The first page,
Okay.
personal property tax replacement.
Personal property tax is sitting at 59,000, 59,279.
Is that a negative next to that?
No, that's,
Is that just a typo?
no, it's in the next column, the remaining dollars. The 59,000 for the 279, which is actually, and if you look at the 45,000, the calculation there is, it's with it, that represents we received over that which.
Understand.
that which-
I understand that. So my question is that a negative sign in front of the dollar sign, or is that just a typo?
That's, yeah, I see the negative sign, but that's related to the third column.
Okay.
It's related to the year-to-date funds, budget minus action.
And same thing's true on other income.
That reminded me of a question I had on page 2, assessor's office and operation. We have us at negative 48%.
Page 2.
So it's near the bottom.
That's sales price.
Oh,
Miscellaneous.
Oh, that's
Oh,
miscellaneous.
it's my miscellaneous.
Yeah, what that miscellaneous is that's an account. And I think I've addressed this before, we had this happen before. If we had, the issue was there was a $5,000 check, and this was several months ago, that had gone into the account because it had been deposited into the general assistance account. We have one sitting there that had done for the GADI refund. And when the deposit was done, the Rich had done this deposit, it went into that account. And so in order to do that, you have to pull those dollars out and then refund it back.
Okay.
It's basically what it's a.
That was a training on general assistance that myself and Jean were supposed to go to, but was canceled for COVID. So, okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Madam Clerk.
Just really briefly, I wanted to let everyone know, in case you were curious, that the levy and the truth in taxation were filed electronically with the county office on December 23rd, and I got an email back to that effect. So they're all uploaded and that's good to go. And boy, is that easy. You just upload it, click some buttons, and it's on. So that's my report.
I miss running into someone downtown.
Yeah.
I ran into her on 3 years in a row while I was
Yeah.
filing that document.
I think he just did that to see you.
Absolutely.
Do you have any updates on the annual meeting at all?
No, I'm still working, securing the location.
Okay. And just a reminder that would be on the 12th.
It is the 12th. It's my daughter's 16th birthday. So,
No, it will not. And that is statutorily set.
Yep.
Hope to see you all there. Great. All right. I see that our assessor is online. Let me go ahead and can you? All right. You're up, Madam Assessor.
okay. And I hope everybody can hear me okay?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. And sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I had another meeting that ended at 7:15 and I couldn't get back in time. So first of all, we are open for appeals to the Board of Review now. These are 2021 appeals. They are happening after the beginning of the new calendar year, but that's irrelevant to the tax cycle. So nobody should worry about this. We're still going to get reassessed in a few months. The final date to file is February 1st, and Len and I are both in the office. We are working, and quite frankly, we are being so far kept quite busy, which we like. We're very happy for that, so thank you and keep it coming. The county assessor has put out on his website a notice that the forms for 2021 filings for exemptions will be available in late February. For the last, well, I've been here for going on 8 years now, and for all that time they've been available in January. So they're behind on that, but they will come out. And so people can wait. There will still be, a time period to make applications if needs be. And all of the collected information will show up on the second tax bills whenever they come out this year. So nobody needs to worry about whether they have an exemption or the senior freeze in as of a certain date. We don't even yet know what those dates are. Excuse me. Board of Review Commissioner Mike Cabinargi, and we are all of New Trier Township is now part of Mike Cabinargi's Board of Review District. Until this year, we were split. He handled Wilmette, and Dan Patlak, and then more recently, Commissioner Tammy Wendt handled the rest of the township. So most of New Trier Township was actually in a different district. We will now all be in Mike Cabinargi's district. And he is holding an outreach event on 2 weeks from tonight, January 25th at 6 p.m. It's a Zoom meeting naturally. There are some sheets in the back of the room there if anybody wants to take one. It's online sign up. And thanks very much to Julie for getting all that information done this afternoon so that we could have it out there for everybody, and it will be posted, notices will be posted on social media. Both Gail as supervisor and I as township assessor are co-hosting this meeting, so we're listed in it. This is to get the broadest possible message out to our township residents. If you have questions about appeals, Board of Review appeals, the timing, whatever, come to that meeting. This is the time to attend and get, if not get heard, at least be able to listen to some parts of what the process is about. Excuse me. And then the last thing that I have for tonight is very simply that ordinarily I would deliver a quarterly report for the fourth quarter of the previous year. But since we're working pretty hard on appeals at the moment, that report will be delivered next month. And I hope by that time we will have our 2021 sales figures as well as just the statistics we'll be able to put together from our own office on, business transacted and so forth. And that's the end of my report. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jan. Any questions for Jan or Assessor Churchwell? And I'm sorry, I'm remiss for not noting that we did swear in Assessor Churchwell for her official term, which started January 1, which is not the same as the time the trustees started.
That's true.
At the same time, we also swore in our new trustee with some of the cutest helpers we could have had. And it then went straight into our holiday party. So a good time had by all. So you're official.
Right.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. So I will now the moment you've all been waiting for, our committee funding presentations. Just as a introductory measure, I just wanted to thank Brian for his tireless efforts. It's really a difficult job to organize all this. I know that you know more about the agencies in this area than anyone, and everybody appreciates your opinions and advice when we're deciding on these important allocations. I'd like to thank all of our volunteers and in particular, our committee chairs who are here to present. But obviously we cannot, it would be very complicated for the 5 of us to go through every agency application with the fine tooth comb that you are able to do so. And we really do rely on your recommendations and yearly and throughout the year, your liaison reports to ensure that we're being good stewards of our tax dollars as well as serving our community. So thank you all. So we will start with Paul Lively, who will be presenting the recommendations from Agency Oversight Committee.
All is on Zoom.
And I will go ahead and ask you to unmute and unmute. You are still unmuted. Press, yep, there you go. You should get it.
Okay, great. I am the chairman of the Agency Oversight Committee,
Turn it up a little.
presenting its recommendations. It's been my pleasure to be the committee chair for 5 years, and this will be my last report. As always, the committee implemented our standard application review procedures and liaison responsibilities. Before
Paul, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Hold on, Paul.
Would you mind just speaking a little bit louder?
Is my computer down here? Let me see.
We have our volume pretty far up. Would you mind just,
Is that better? I'm up as loud as I can go here. Can you hear me now?
go ahead.
Is it all right now?
Yes, just speak as loud as you can. We appreciate
All
it.
right. All right. Let me begin by thanking our committee members, Deb Hahami, Patricia Balsamo, Ellen Van Vechten, Melissa Frey, Leslie Wyrich, Brian Brandt, Sharon Weingarten, Cynthia Levine, David Barta, Ian Larkin, and of course, our assigned trustee, Danielle Rubin. In addition to our normal responsibilities, a couple of us worked this summer with members of other committees on developing a township conflict of interest policy and on updating our funding guidelines. The board has adopted both efforts. The guidelines will cover applications submitted next fall. As to the conflict of interest policy, special thanks are owed to Ellen Van Vechten for her continued and persevering efforts to encourage the board to create and to adopt the recently approved policy. The township is now in better alignment with its peers in implementing best practices. I also want to offer special thanks to Brian Leverance as our Community Services Administration for his yeoman support. It has been a pleasure to work with him. This year, we reviewed 11 of 12 agencies which reapplied from last year. A 12th agency, Hadley School for the Blind and Visually Impaired, did not reapply. It's important to note the new funding guidelines confirm our last year's recommendation to the board not to fund Hadley. Excuse me. For this year, I think you have the funding sheet, but to summarize, the committee recommends awarding a total of $386,500 out of $452,500 requested. This is kind of an uncharacteristic reduction of about 14.5%. This is due to our generally recommended reductions in youth center funding and our lack of support for their combined increased requests totaling $20,000. I'll get into that in just a moment. But finally, I want to confirm our decisions are consistent with the township's mission and guiding principles. But to continue where I left off from last year, it's been our ongoing concern about continued generous township funding for the 4 youth agencies. Over the years, they have been experiencing overall declining and sporadic attendance. It is increasingly made up of junior high students. While these trends were exhibited prior to the pandemic caused attendance to plummet. Students understandably are not interested in more virtual programming beyond their school day. They also have social media connections. The pandemic periodically closed all 4 youth centers, and the committee continues to ask if these agencies are, as stated in the township's guiding principles, creating new energetic ideas and programs while maintaining existing programs which are relevant and effective. As you may recall, last year, due to the pandemic's unexpected impacts on the youth agencies, the committee recommended fully funding them. Now, with the year's pandemic experience, the agencies readily recognize that going forward, their programs will require continued adjustment and flexibility. But I must begin with the Glencoe Junior High Project Agency, as it stands apart from the other 3. While its attendance was good, the committee understands that the new funding guidelines will likely disqualify any award for next year. Specifically, the new guidelines require an agency to serve all of the township or be part of a group of agencies offering similar services to the township. The junior high project does not satisfy this requirement. It focuses primarily on in-school activities at Central School. Given the clarity provided by the upcoming guidelines, the committee recommends having the agency's usual $20,000 a year award to $10,000. The committee's goal is to assist the agency's transition away from funding. Also, the committee notes the junior high project currently has 2 years of reserves. Should its model be revised in the future to satisfy the upcoming guidelines, the committee would expect it to renew then its application. As for the other youth agencies, they have reopened, but except for Glencoe Youth Services, their attendance has been poor. While the pandemic required transition to virtual programs for all the youth centers, the warming house was hit hard. The pandemic impacted students' ability to interact in person with staff having social work and mental health training. The warming house reported only 12 teens and 20 visits last year, despite having full staff. The warming house currently projects poor attendance substantially lower than the other youth centers. It requests a $3,000 increase, which the committee does not recommend. Likewise, the Winnetka Youth Organization was closed for part of the past summer and fall. It had a complete turnover of staff. Its current funding application and past history raised the issue of whether it has the appropriate management oversight to justify funding. The agency has had continuing board issues and lost its executive director for a period of time. This year, the board submitted an incomplete, incomprehensible, and unsigned application requesting an unsupported $17,000 increase. On the positive side, the agency appears to have hired an accomplished executive director, but her vision as presented to the committee is yet to be realized and evaluated. In comparison, Glencoe Youth Services submitted a complete application and documented its success in attracting youth participation. It did not request an increase of last year's $38,000 award. Based upon its apparent success in working through the pandemic, the committee believes that Glencoe Youth Services serves as a reasonable funding yardstick for the warming house and the O. As such, the committee recommends $38,000 be awarded to each of the 3 youth agencies. These awards are to be dispersed not as a lump sum, but instead divided equally into 3 separate installments and dispersed partially upon their tracked actual attendance compared with their projected attendance. The committee recognizes that attendance is the correct measurement in defining agency success. Each youth agency will receive 1/3 of its allocation at the first funding cycle on July 1, but after that, each agency will get 2 separate 1/3 disbursements based on meeting or exceeding its projected attendance. If it falls short, the 1/3 disbursement is reduced proportionally, but any shortfall is offset to the extent of any prior attendance overages, and this serves to smooth out variations in attendance. But also we have other concerns about these agencies. Some have small boards. They are highly dependent upon township fundings. 2 have weak finances. There is an absence of juniors and seniors, and collaboration between them is frequently a challenge. Frankly, many of the committee members believe the youth center's model needs to be changed but recommending a model change is probably beyond the scope of this committee. The other agencies did not present any current issues of concern. With one exception, none requested an increase from last year's awards to them. I'll start with the Career Resource Center, which requested a $2,000 increase. Last year's award of $18,000 helped CRC transition employment services to a virtual format. The committee does not support increasing last year's award. While a renewed $18,000 award somewhat exceeds its cost to serve the township, we do not recommend reducing the award because of CRC's major efforts at talent acquisition and board expansion. CRC continues to have an 85% success rate measured in terms of clients obtaining a job within a year. The Volunteer Center has been and continues to be a strong contributor to community volunteerism. It is our clearinghouse for those seeking volunteer service opportunities. Many of its services are web-based, which we help fund. The Volunteer Center continues with its annual days of service programs. It has expanded its board by adding 6 new directors and has produced a safe volunteer guide. It is resuming its not-for-profit best practices training programs, and as such, we are recommending renewing last year's award of $15,000. Meals on Wheels of Northeastern Illinois has had an eventful year, opening its own kitchen, adding substantially more clients, and adding staff and delivery location. Supply chain issues are also causing problems in food acquisition. Costs have risen substantially, increasing dependency on donations, as client fees account for just 15 to 20% of a budget exceeding $1 million. Besides fundraising, is looking for ways to obtain reimbursement from others, including insurance companies and hospitals. The committee recommends renewing last year's funding of $25,000. It has 51 clients in the township, and we have requested that it continue to increase the number of Glencoe residents. The North Shore Senior Center is requesting a combined $145,000 for 3 programs. Demand for its services has risen substantially, especially from those who are isolated by the pandemic. It reports good outcomes for all its programs. Until last July, most programs were virtual, but some of the memory loss programs were held live in small groups. Late payment from the state continues to be an issue, and the agency is planning a capital campaign. The agency has a year's reserves. Rebuilding Together, its funding goes towards home rehab projects in the township. Every dollar is spent on direct, concrete, and visible benefits to our residents. The agency receives referrals from municipal code enforcement bodies and social workers. Its costs for new true residents are in excess of our grants, and the agency continues to expand in the township. The committee recommends renewing last year's funding of $40,000. The committee does note that many of its clients are repeat users, and we are encouraging it to continue to spread its services more widely in the township. The Alliance for Early Childhood seeks funding for parent, family, and education programs. These are presented online. This approach for parents and educators is called vertical programming in comparison to the Let's Play program. That program, which we previously have helped fund, is geared towards the entire family. The vertical programming geared for parents presents the topic entitled Virtual Parent Series, Making Sense of Kids, What Kids Need Most from Adults. The vertical programming geared for educators presents the topic entitled Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation. These programs are ultimately to children's benefit, and the committee recommends renewing last year's funding of $7,500. The last agency is the North Suburban Legal Clinic. With one exception, it provides legal services to those satisfying low-income guidelines. The one exception is domestic violence cases in which an aggrieved spouse may not have access to family resources. Besides domestic violence cases, it represents clients in immigration and landlord-tenant disputes. Its outreaches include holding virtual legal clinics for the township, and we encourage them to do more here. It is expecting additional cases from Afghan refugees, from any changes to immigration laws, and from a lifting of tenant eviction bans. In closing, I do want to mention one interesting creative clinic tool. What it does is to provide mock computer screens to domestic violence clients when advising them online. The mock screens are for pretend cooking classes. Should an abusive spouse walk in and approach a client while the client is on the computer, the client can click on a mock screen to override and disguise the clinic screen so it looks as if there's a cooking class going on, which I think we all thought was a pretty unique and creative solution to a real problem. Thank you, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. If anyone wants to see what those cooking demonstrations look like, the next one is on the 13th. And I can give you the login information. They are fascinating. You'll now turn to.
You have some questions before.
Okay, but yeah, let's do them. Yeah, let's do them after each committee. That's right.
Paul, Elliot Robbins here.
Yes.
I want to thank you for your wonderful leadership of agency oversight and for your hard work and the committee's hard work.
Thank
You
you.
guys do a great job. In listening to your presentation, your excellent presentation, it sounds like you folks made the determination that Glencoe, I'm talking about the 3 youth service agencies, that Glencoe, with a year of COVID experience or pandemic experience behind it, pivoted in a manner that they were still able to have high attendance and be successful in a changed environment. Whereas you folks felt that Winnetka and Warming House and Wilmette did not pivot successfully. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I think, you know, we talked about this in the committee, and there's something that's called disengagement. There's a disengagement policy, not policy, but phenomenon in which when people leave an activity and they find another activity to replace it, it's hard for them to come back to their original activities. And I think that I mean, this has been written up in the Wall Street Journal about churches, and so we've talked about it. And I think with the warming house, one of their primary draws was the fact that they had a staff that had social workers, social working background, and mental health backgrounding, so that when students went there, they got a personal relationship with the staff. But then the pandemic killed that, their ability to attend, and they lost that ability to interact with staff. So then we kind of get into the disengagement phenomenon, where now they've got social media, they've got the other friends that they're dealing with, and this virtual programming about going on after school was kind of a non-starter for them, because they had virtual classes all day long. So I think those two things really detracted from the warming house's ability to attract people. And Brian and I, we asked each of the agencies to provide us with metrics as to what they thought would be good measures of their success. And the warming house came back with, well, what we've really got to do now is try to understand what our students really want. What they wanted to do was to conduct surveys, have interviews, and so they had a very thoughtful approach. But, you know, and I think to a certain extent, we may have overfunded them a little bit in terms of those activities, because their attendance is going to be down. The Winnetka Youth Organization is entirely different kettle of fish. While the warming house has in the past been kind of a poster child of what we would expect an agency to be, the Winnetka Youth Organization has been very disappointed. They have had difficulty with the board. They have had difficulty attracting people. They have lost staff. There has been a high turnover. As I mentioned, they lost their executive director. And so while the executive director came in and presented a lot of good ideas, we don't have any proof yet. One of the ideas that they presented was to increase diversity in terms of attendance, but well, that's all great and good, but I'm not sure we're coming from a truly diverse committee, so our community. So those are some of the questions that the committee has as to how successful the new executive director will be. She was very, very well-spoken and made a great presentation, but we have yet to see whether or not they're going to deliver. And given some of the past history, we question that.
Brief follow-up, how was it that Glencoe Youth Services kept its attendance up?
I think they did that through a very aggressive executive director. You may recall a couple of years ago, he was new to the agency, and he came in and presented to us the fact that he, unlike anybody else to that point in time, had been able to contact New Trier High School and get recognition of all of the youth, not just Glencoe Youth Services, but all of the agencies as being a legitimate club at the high school. Previously, the high school had been kind of pushing back from any connection with the youth agencies. And I think from his, Director Bernard's, what I want to say, his enthusiasm, I think he changed, or maybe there was some change at the township or at the high school, but I think he was able to persuade them that these youth agencies were entitled to equal time during the school day, as are the other high school activities. And then unfortunately, we got hit with the pandemic, which kind of put the kibosh on that. But I think that's a good example of how he is always outreaching to the people that attend his center. he is always in communication with them and is reinforcing the support and the activity, the supportive activities that the agency provides. And I think, again, you know, for instance, in comparison with the Yo, they didn't have people there. And, you know, and then I think, again, with the warming house, it was a different question in terms of being able to relate to the staff. But I do think that Glencoe Youth Services provides the same kind of mental health support, maybe not to the same degree as the warming house. But the bottom line is, as I tried to say, this committee really can't change the models. We've tried to adjust the funding so that an agency's success can be supported and we get an opportunity to monitor what they are doing. But everybody on the committee believes that there is probably a better approach than this historical approach. And I know some of us have talked about maybe New Trier Township itself hiring one executive director to oversee several agencies at a more at a higher salary than probably each of these community centers can afford to pay their executive directors. So I guess my last comment is, you know, we've had trouble with collaboration among these agencies. And I think 3 or 4 years ago, the Winnetka Youth Organization and Glencoe Youth Services tried to merge, but there was a falling out among the executive directors, and so that failed. So the ability to make these centers more efficient and effective is probably maybe a year or two away.
Let me add one thing real quick, because I think it's very important to mention, Elliot. Everything he said is true and right. But one other thing is that it isn't that Glencoe Youth Services is that much better than the other agencies. What they have is a captive audience, because kids from Glencoe Junior High Project go right over there, whereas there's not a junior high feeder anymore for the warming house or the Winnetka Youth Organization. So GYS has a distinct advantage in that regard. They're right across the street from the school. They communicate with Glencoe Junior High Project, so kids naturally go there. And, you know, it's why the majority of their attendance is junior high kids, just like it is with all the youth centers. So it's another reason why we probably should not continue to fund Glencoe Junior High Project, because it's like double funding.
Paul, do you know if the Yo paid rent when they were closed?
I don't know, but I think Brian does.
They did continue to pay rent. And is it fair to say that the $38,000 allocated to the Yo and the warming house is actually an arbitrary number? It's not based
No,
on-
it's not an arbitrary number. It's based upon the Glencoe Youth Services Award last year of $38,000, which they requested a renewal of. So we figured that that was the yardstick. If they're successful at $38,000, let's see what the warming house and the Yo can do. Because certainly the Yo had, I want to say, a very incomplete, ineffective application. In fact, there were a number of, while the committee wants to do things by consensus, there were a number of committee members who voted against giving any funding to the Yo.
Yeah, if the Glencoe Youth Services can do just fine on $38,000, the committee thought, why can't the other two?
But for instance, the Yo is paying rent. Glencoe doesn't pay rent. I mean, these are separate organizations. I think they should stand on their own. And I don't think that what's good for one is good for the others necessarily. It may turn out that that's the case, but I think it's arbitrary. That's my opinion.
Well, I guess I would beg to differ. We didn't think it was arbitrary. We do think that the Glencoe Youth Services is a reasonable measure of performance.
Can I ask a brief question? With respect to the benchmarking for tying the second and third payments to the youth organizations to attendance,
Yes.
COVID's not going anywhere. If we go back into lockdown, will attendance by virtual be counted the same as in person? What if there's a hybrid model? What if an organization does something like a take and do a kit at home? Would these all be counted for the purposes of the second and third payment benchmarking requirements?
The answer to all your questions is yes.
Ryan, with regard to that, have we ever done that before with regard to a second and third payment within a given year? Have we ever told an agency that your second and third payments might be contingent on X, Y, and Z?
No, we have never done that before, although we have had agencies on kind of a probationary status before where funding was contingent.
On a
certain
year by
kind of
year
performance, but we've never had an allocation based on level of performance. We've had a couple of times we've had agencies who say, if you don't do this, we're going to discontinue funding.
But
And that
everyone
happened in one case, we cut off funding for
for the following year.
the following year, yes.
But Paul, when we, and we're gonna have to talk about this internally, but when we tell an agency at the beginning of a year that you're going to get X, but you might only get part of X. You know, it's very hard for them to plan and budget accordingly, knowing that in the second and third installment may or may not be there. So this is uncharted territory, as Brian confirmed, and we're gonna have to discuss it amongst ourselves.
Well, no, I believe me, the committee understands that, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to move the ball forward here. There's no question that they've been overfunded, and I think that we all recognize that attendance is really the metric of success. All these programs that they do, if they don't have attendance, then you know they're not successful. I think that if in fact the agencies understand that the funding is based upon their own projections. We're not making the projections for them. We've asked them to make yearly projections, and we've asked them to make projections on 4-month intervals. The first funding is not dependent upon attendance. The second funding which is 8 months later into the funding cycle, is really dependent upon how they do in terms of having attendance in comparison with what they themselves projected. And then the same thing happens for the third tranche. But again, to the extent that there has been some variation in attendance, previous overages apply to assist the meeting their marks on the later intervals, later periods.
I would note that the projected attendance numbers we saw from the warming house, for example, are just pathetic. I mean, you're talking about an agency, they're talking like 150 visits in a year, which is, a quarter of what they used to have. But yet they asked for more money. And then the Winnetka Youth Organization asked for a huge increase, and yet they're projecting less attendance.
Brian, I had in my notes from the warming houses presentation, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that from July 1st to when they made the presentation, that there were 35 teens for 65 visits. So there has been some improvement. So here it says only 12 teens and 20 visits, and that was during the pandemic, which
Right, and they got full funding,
Quite
despite
well.
that absolutely pathetic number.
But then I
They
do
didn't lay off any
have,
staff. I mean, and that's what the PPP money was for, not to have to lay off staff. So, but yeah, it's still, that's a better number, but it's still far below what they have been prior to the pandemic. And, kids just aren't interested in virtual stuff. They're not.
Ryan, quick question on warming house and Winnetka Youth. What percentage of their overall budget comes from New Trier Township
Roughly half.
on both of those agencies?
Yeah. In fact, I would say it's probably more than slightly over half. And we're also half of Glencoe of GYS's budget as well. They have operated on a budget of $75,000 to $80,000 a year for the last 3 or 4 years. So now they have a SNAP program as well, which is another $15,000 just counted as their budget. But for the youth program, they've operated a budget of $75,000 to $80,000 for the last 2 or 3 years. So
And this 38,000 is for Glencoe Youth Services, that's both for youth services and SNAP? That's both projects? The drop-in center and SNAP?
No, not SNAP.
Okay.
Not SNAP.
Well, thank you for some outstanding and detailed answers.
Okay, well, thank you. I've enjoyed working with you.
Thank you. Ed, would you mind presenting on mental health committee?
I'm Ed Ollinger, members of the board, ladies and gentlemen, and Zoomers on the wall. Okay. I also come to the end of my tenure for the Mental Health Committee. It was a pleasurable 4 years working with Brian Leverance. The committee functioned very well with a core group of 7 members plus trustee and staff person. I'd like to thank all the members of the committee for their hard work, which includes Richard Drake, Nan Ham, Laura Copeland, and 2 new members, Joel Kurtzman and Karen McCormick, and Renee Cox. Also, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank Brian Leverance for his outstanding work, his tremendous historical insights into the agencies that we review. It is my opinion that we're fortunate to have him as our community services administrator. So in terms of recommendations,
I'll get you that beer later.
it's worth more than beer. Well, this year, we again worked through COVID. We had virtual hearings and discussions, and some meetings were in person. We had a hybrid model for a while. We reviewed a total of 12 agencies, operating 17 programs that serve New Trier Township residents. 8 of our 12 agencies did not ask for an increase, but we still looked at the proposal and request carefully. Several trends are quite noticeable during COVID in that mental health needs and distress associated with the pandemic increased the demand for most mental health services. However, because services were often provided virtually, evaluation efforts were often given short shrift. Our recommendations are as follows. Haven did not request an increase, and we allocated them their full request of $118,000, $80,000 for outreach, and $38,000 for family intervention and counseling. The outreach program is an educational program on mental health for the students. Over the last year, the agency has added staff and budget, which has reduced their waiting list. They have a Lake County office, new assessment tools, and an office across from New Trier has been busier than ever. There are still concerns about evaluation and outcomes for outreach and response rates for family therapy. Harbor is an agency which we funded in the past, but they did not apply for funding this year. Most likely due to the fact that they serve no New Trier Township residents this year or last year. Peer Services also did not request an increase, asking for $105,000 across 3 programs: adult treatment, adolescent treatment, and prevention services. This is one of the few agencies who saw their client load decrease as court referrals were way down. While our funding levels are probably a little high for the level of service to New Trier Township clients this past year, We are confident the numbers will go up as the courts open back up. Agency has also opened a new location in Turning Point Mental Health Center, which makes up for closing their Glenview office last year to save costs. This new office is less expensive and makes referrals for clients with a dual diagnosis from Turning Point much easier. The switch to virtual services drastically lowered their cancellation and no-show rates. The agency ran a large surplus last year, revamped its compensation package to retain staff, but needs to work hard on board development. They have also updated their electronic record system and have taken the lead on the North Shore Coalition for Drug-Free Communities, but need to improve response rates for surveys and outcomes, as do many agencies. Their board is also quite small, and this has been an ongoing concern. Cancer Wellness did not request an increase, and with reserves well over 1 year, it is unlikely they would have received one. But we are very pleased with this agency. They have increased services and caseloads. They finally implemented outcomes for both clients and caregivers and collected data on it. It added the ability to serve children and have increased the number of males in service. The majority of their clients continue to prefer virtual services. The Children's Advocacy Center is funded for 2 programs, and one received a modest increase to the request, which is the Forensic Advocacy Service, formerly known as CASI, a program which saw a big increase in New Trier Township clients up to 21. As schools opened up again, mandatory reporters again were free to report on suspected abuse cases, and their caseloads went way up. Their outcomes continue to be excellent, and they always do an excellent job completing the proposal, and they now have 4 sites: Hoffman Estates, Evanston, Streamwood, and Northbrook. Their executive director is one of our longest standing execs, and they soon hope to have on-site medical services instead of having to refer out to hospitals. The FAS program was increased from $6,500 to $7,500, and family support requested it and received $1,500. Erica's Lighthouse asked for and received the same level of funding they have for many years, $16,000. Agency continues to project significant growth both in staff and budget, and within a few years may have a $1 million budget. So 90% of clients will be outside of New Trier Township, and over 95% of services will be outside our communities, making them a national organization. Their reserves still exceed 1 year, though if they grow to $1 million agency, this may change. They are working on improving evaluation and outcomes, have a new video and curriculum, and have broadened focus beyond depression to mental health. They are in every school that feeds into New Trier and finally gained access to Loyola. Now, the 3 family services agencies are now doing the majority of their counseling services via telehealth. Glencoe Family Services received an increase for the first time in many years from $40,000 to $45,000. They have responded well to telehealth with reduced cancellations and improved session attendance. And like the other family service agencies, most clients report the pandemic as a mental health issue. Agency also needs additional space, which is hard to find in Glencoe. Their director, William Hansen, is leaving, and the search is underway for a new director. Many plans, such as the search for space and a new strategic plan, are on hold until they find a new director. Though the agency has reserves of a year, we gave them the requested increase. Their fee subsidy levels have been increasing, and they get much less than half of the revenues from fees, also indicating a high level of subsidy. And they are trying to do more community education and outreach. Now, Family Services of Wilmette also received an increase per the request from $70,000 to $75,600. There have been lots of changes at the agency. They discontinued psychiatric services, have a new space, and added fundraising staff person. Their new space is larger and less expensive than their old space. Usage was up, and the agency gets just over half its revenues from fees, indicating a high level of subsidy, though not as high as Glencoe and the Counseling Center of the North Shore. North Shore Counseling Center did not request an increase and has reserved in excess of 18 months. They were allocated their request of $42,000. The agency needs more board members and is looking at future expansion, which has been delayed by COVID. They have a waiting list and a plan on adding staff. About 60% of their services have been telehealth and 40% in person. Once again, we funded the YWCA at the level of $25,000. It's always with the understanding that you do not place any new Township clients on a waiting list for courtroom advocacy services. Some years we get a little more than $25,000 worth of service, and some years a little less. This year, we probably got a little more than $25,000 worth. The agency has opened new housing and has a lot of expenses for part of the last year when they put clients in hotels. They also operate a batterers program. That's a batterers program, not a batters program. Batterers program with an 80% success rate. Youth Services operates 2 programs and both requested increases. We increased the SHARE program, which is again education workshops related to sexual health, from $25,000 to $28,000. But the Pride Youth program for LGBTQ youth, which is a social support and a leadership program for those individuals. And the Pride program did not receive an increase and stayed at $20,000, mostly due to the fact that they did not provide more than $20,000 worth of service to clients from the Township, whereas they did in the SHARE program. The agency needs to do a better job of collecting outcome data and getting higher response rates for its clients. Some of the outcomes fell short of expectations in both programs. They are looking at revamping their evaluation efforts and hope that more in-person programming will improve results, since it seems that virtual services are not as effective with youth. The Zachariah Center also did not request an increase, and with reserve level of almost 2 years for almost twice their $2 million budget, it's unlikely they would have received one. They do still have a waiting list for services, even with the new office in Skokie having been set up and running now for over a year. Agency has not been that responsive to our concerns about outcomes and evaluation. It was not in the proposal though. Although it was not in the proposal, we did get some data what we asked for. Though it's incomplete, and the agency reports a poor response rate to surveys and data collection. However, the level of service to New Township clients is way over the $5,000 that they asked. Finally, SamariCare requested an increase from $15,000 to $20,000, and it was granted. The agency has been responsive to our recommendations, revamping its fee scale to be more generous, though it still collects a much higher percentage of its budget through fees than the family service agencies. 33 New Township households were served with reduced fees, with an estimated deficit of $23,000, though it is a little less than last year. It's a large agency with a $2.6 million budget. They should do more collaboration with the family service agencies in providing community education and other services. They also need to improve response rates to surveys. In summary, the Mental Health Committee allocated a total of $523,600, a 2.87% increase over last year's allocations of $509,000, but less than the request this year of $530,600. Thank you very much, and I'll answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
Excellent presentation. Everyone, I thank you for your leadership and for your hard work on the committee. Just outstanding in all respects.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. Thank you.
And just out of, for everyone's kind of knowledge, Children's Advocacy Center sends me this letter every month that says how many people that they're serving from clients from us. So just as a, you know, it can be done for the youth services as well. But it's nice to get. So. I'm sorry that it's up, but yeah. It is. All right. Money follows the person committee, Mitch.
My name is Mitchell Doolan. I've been on the committee for a few years. This is my first year as chair. Excuse me, I get rigor mortis. On behalf of our committee, which is Jessica Tucker, Bridget Orth, Tammy Smiley, Bruce Seitzer, George Vanderberg, Chris Eilers, and Lisa Winnetka. We just want to thank Brian. I've been involved in a number of entities over the decades, and Brian's level of leadership, insight, professionalism, and his dedication is fantastic. I mean, I've worked with him on passing out turkey dinners for Christmas and Thanksgiving. It just goes way and above. And I'm not saying that you have to give him more money, but you know, I just hope that he's appreciated within the township. And I have plenty of beer, thank you. I used to run biddies, so I got a room full with stuff that my son decided he didn't want to drink, so I got a little. Anyway, this year we reviewed 14 agencies which operated 20 programs. Many of the agencies did not ask for an increase, but we still reviewed everybody very carefully. There's some people on this committee that are really can dig down into the numbers, which I think was very, very beneficial. Some agencies and programs actually were reduced for reasons that we brought up later. And as with the other committees, some of our meetings this year were virtual, but our hearings and decision-making meeting were live. Some members tuned in via Zoom, but this seemed to work very well for the whole process. And our recommendations are as follows. The Center for Enriched Living is a longtime township-funded agency providing recreational and social opportunities for people with disabilities. And they now are providing additional vocational services. They requested $25,000, which is the same as previous years, and we did grant it. Though the level of service to New Trier Township clients dropped from 22 to 16, they're still providing over $200,000 worth of service to our residents. So I think that's a great return. The number of New Trier Township clients served there dropped due to COVID, obviously, and also some clients moved out of the area, but we also note that since our place opened, the number of New Trier Township residents using Center for Enriched Living has not increased. This agency is very generous with scholarships and reduced fees, with fees accounting for just 15% of the budget last year. So a third of their budget is from the fees, but the majority of it comes from their raising from clients, and they do a number of fundraisers. They do a big dinner that they do in the fall every year. I believe it's in Lincolnshire, and they have different restaurants set up tables and people pay, to come in, and it's very effective. The physical plant is first rate. They do a nice mix of virtual and live programming, but like many agencies in this field, they faced staffing challenges. They had a very high staff turnover. Their core people still stayed in place, but they did lose a lot of people. And we recognize that that they do have some issues that are challenging, but the fact that they are still only requesting $25,000 and providing that amount of service to the township clients, I think is admirable, and we do want to support them. Lamb's Farm requested the same amount of funding as last year, which was $18,000, and we granted that also. They also got hit hard by staff shortages and turnover. They got hit very hard. They have an 18% vacancy rate right now, and the administration staff are now working in direct care, and they're doing everything from driving trucks to working in the retail. They've really dug in, and they're working to try and get new staff hired and trained, and they're hoping that most of their vocational clients are going to be able to go back to work soon, which I think will help them a lot. The next one is Arts of Life. They didn't ask for an increase either. And we did allocate their request of $20,000. They're now operating under a hybrid model with some virtual and some live programming, but we do note that for many artists with disabilities, the virtual services are not as effective, unfortunately. So the great organization. Their outcomes and goal setting for clients was mostly non-existent during all virtual services. They are working on a revised pay schedule to retain their staff. So hopefully that's going to be effective for them. SNAP requested $10,000, which again was the same as last year. The number of participants dropped somewhat during COVID, but they still average 17 clients or so every session, which is either virtual or live. They've been live since July. It's an inexpensive program, and our funding primarily covers staff. And the social program does revolve primarily around dinner, which is also often donated. The annual budget is just over $16,000, which Glencoe Youth Services administers. Their numbers climb back up to 25 plus as it did pre-COVID. They may look for a second site for a second night of programming, which I think would be great. Glencoe operates 3 programs which we have funded for many years: vocational, residential, and respite. While the level of service to Winnetka Township residents has remained consistent over the years in residential and vocational, the same has not been true for respite. By Glencoe's own estimate, which we asked for, they used just $7,278 of our funds this past year for respite, and they did not use all the funding from last year either. So while we gave them their request for vocational and residential of $45,000 and $25,000, we reduced respite to $10,000, which is still more than they provided in service to the residents. The drop obviously is due to the pandemic and difficulty in finding workers. We hope to see the numbers go back up this year, but with COVID, who knows? We also know the difficulty the agency's had with staff departures, and it does have a big inability to hire new staff. They have a 28% vacancy rate in their staffing, which is really hard. Clearbrook only applied for 2 programs instead of 3 this year, as they did not apply for children's services, despite serving more Winnetka Township clients than ever before in employment. Because this service level to our residents in employment is very low, we kept their allocation at last year's level of $12,000, despite the fact that they asked for $20,000. We're not sure why they did not apply for children's services. We didn't get an answer. We increased our allocation for residential to $30,000, which was consistent with their request. But overall funding to Clearbrook dropped from $50,000 to $42,000. This agency also experienced staff shortages and high vacancy rates, but has been unusually creative in finding ways to respond to them with bonuses and increased pay. So they're keeping a lot of their core people, but they are short. Total allocation for Clearbrook is $42,000, which was less than last year's $50,000 allocation. Special Gifts Theater applied for the same level of funding as last year, $25,000 for youth theater and $5,000 for the adult program, both of which we were fully and highly recommended. The theater operated live for youth, but it's still virtual for adults. As always, they have a high repeat rate for participants. It's a solid evidence-based program with outcomes backed by research, and they consistently achieve. But most importantly, the kids and their parents love it. It's a fantastic organization. Our place in Winnetka Township asked for and received $135,000, which was up from last year's request of $130,000. The agency has completed its renovation of its facility, which brought their reserves down considerably, and they also added new staff. It's no longer just a transition program, as most clients are over age 26. Mature clients are half their users, and the agency certainly could add more clients, and hopefully they will when the pandemic slows down. Budget continues to grow and may reach over $1 million in a few years, which is pretty remarkable considering they started with a $25,000 grant from the township a number of years ago. Fantastic growth. Our House Communities is a group home that's a mix of public and private money. They requested $37,500, and we cut them down to $30,000 from last year's allocation of $35,000. They are still operating a house with 3 people instead of 4. So basically, they're operating at 75% of capacity, and it doesn't seem like they've had a lot of motivation or an ability to bring in that 4th person. So it is impacting, I think, the people that are left living there. The person that's running it is very, very dedicated. This is not a licensed SILA, by the way. The committee didn't feel that we should increase our subsidy beyond the $10,000 per person level because it's meant to be primarily a mixed model of funding, and the agency needs to motivate them to find a 4th person for the home, as I mentioned. Jocelyn Center has had an amazing past year, adding a Lake County office and roughly doubling budget size after adding all the staff for Lake County. They continue to be the sole agency providing psychiatric services for Medicaid recipients in New Trier Township, and a cornerstone of safety net services available for the township. Our clients continue to grow to get a discounted rate for services, which is expensive. We allocated them their request of $197,600. We don't think that we could fund this agency at any higher level and not be overfunding them. Their drop-in program is meeting live again, but is also available virtually. There is currently a short wait list for psychiatric assistance, which is 20% of their service. Therapy is 70%. And they also have community and employment education, which is 10%. So they're doing a lot of good work and they're very busy. Thresholds again requested $50,000, which we granted, which is the same as last year. We estimate that they provide somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 worth of service to the 22 New Trier Township clients. The state is 2/3 of their budget, so we feel $50,000 is a fair allocation, and we're getting a very good return on the money that we're giving them for the clients. Agency has a good outcome results for a hard to serve clientele, but they also had a high staff turnover and many clients lost their jobs to pandemic. So this is pretty tight for them right now. The committee applauds their high rate of staff, which is almost 95%, I believe, vaccinated against COVID. I don't think a lot of entities can say that. Search and disability awareness program, SNAP, requested $10,000. We granted them only $5,000. Our funding last year was for them to provide at least 5 disability awareness trainings in the township, and they didn't do any, unfortunately, due to COVID. They do have one that they did in-house, in-person training at Loyola Academy in last December, and they hope to have 5 sessions this coming year. So if they get back to that, then they'll justify us returning their level of compensation to $10,000. NAMI requested $20,000 for 4 different programs, but their initial proposal did not detail specific program information, which was a little confusing. We have funded them in the past for the family-to-family program for stipends, so they could recruit teachers to do the trainings for families and how to cope with a person with mental illness. Now they are requesting a total of $20,000 across 4 programs. We granted this, but in the future, they have to provide specific program information. They've had an ongoing difficulty completing forms. The programs funded this year are family education, community education, peer and family support in warm line. They need to hire someone to help them just, I think, with the deal with tracking what they're doing and to do a better job on completing the forms. The agency has strong community presence, and they've been working on evaluation issues that have been a bit problematic also. The last agency is Total Link to Community. They requested $20,000, which is an increase from $10,000 last year. We recommended only $14,000. The agency does customized employment, but COVID has slowed down the process. Obviously, many clients have lost their jobs that they once had. In addition, they ran a huge surplus last year, but they did have high placement and retention rate prior to COVID. So this is an effective organization. They are trying to expand their services. Last year, there were 10 New Trier Township clients that were served. Basically, the committee recommends funding $676,600. It's a reduction from last year's allocation of $705,000. Part of this reduction is due to the fact that the Institute for Therapy Through the Arts did not apply this year for the $7,500 they received last year. But despite the pandemic and associated challenges, including workforce shortages and implementation of higher health safety measures, we feel that these allocations have been fair, and we did take into account the pandemic. We also looked at the level of service to New Trier Township residents and other issues such as the reserves of some of these entities, so we try to accommodate everything on both sides. We feel that we accomplished our objectives and outcomes.
Another excellent presentation. Thank you so much for your leadership and your hard work on the committee.
Any questions for Mitch?
I have a couple of small ones. On Glencoe, they requested 100, we're proposing to give them 80. It sounds like respite, they requested 30 and we're only giving them 10. And if you could just elaborate on that again. Why on respite?
I'd have to get my notes unless Brian can add that right now.
Well, they provided less than $10,000 worth of service for respite last year by their own admission. We asked them for a specific estimate and they came back to us 7,800 something.
7,278. So we
Yeah,
dropped like
and
20.
we overfunded them last year. So the issue with respite is that during the pandemic, people don't want workers coming into the home.
Strangers.
They've had a difficult time getting respite workers. And so by their own admission, this program is way underutilized.
And they understood that very well.
Well, they don't know what our recommendation is yet, but you know.
They have to understand that, I would assume.
We asked them specifically, what did it cost you to serve New Church Township residents? And New Church Township residents the workers that serve New Church Township residents get a higher wage because of our funding, but they just weren't serving the clients.
On Clearbrook, it looks like they didn't ask for funding under the Children's Services Program, and that's why their number is down from last year.
Right.
Had they asked for it, it might have been warranted. With regard to search, they've asked for 10, they did not conduct, could they have conducted virtual training? They did not conduct virtual training.
No. I think it
But
was-
they had the capacity to. Like in the notes in your report, Brian, it indicated that they had the ability to
Yeah,
can do them virtually. So it's not a lack of know-how or materials. It's just not
I
doing
don't
it.
think they had
it
a
just
good.
didn't happen. I mean,
They didn't,
tried.
they didn't really.
They had
They
cancellations.
didn't sell it. I don't think, they didn't really go out there and push it from what I could interpret.
So they did go to Loyola though. So
In
obviously they
December.
proved that a school
Yes.
thing can work. So
Right.
hopefully they will reach out to the other schools.
Yeah, I've been to a couple of trainings. It's very good in terms of, interacting with people with disabilities, but
Just not in the last year.
it's not happening because of the pandemic, so.
I had one last little teeny one. On our house, Priscilla, I almost thought it's been a while since I've been
Remember the
involved,
lady that was running it?
but I thought that there was almost like a waiting list. They can't get
They
that.
couldn't fit everybody in. There just wasn't the fit, in other words.
So there were some families that wanted the unit, but it wasn't a good fit with the three that were already there.
Never happened.
And how is that? Because these families all bonded together to create this. What happens when somebody says, I'd like my son or daughter in there, and it doesn't seem like a good fit? Is there commotion or?
My wife wants to me out of the house. It's just understandably, so I can't imagine the strangers.
It's very difficult to match up these families.
I hear you.
These kids all have significant issues and, plus it's a big issue to have, families have to come up with a big chunk of change for this. This is not a state licensed SILA. The township and the committee we delved into something very unique. This is a public-private partnership.
Which we're
And,
very proud of.
well, but the other thing that I think the board should be cognizant of is that, we are giving $30,000 to 3 people. And, our place may very well operate another house. If they open up another house, are they going to come back to the township and say, okay, we have 4 people here or 3 people here, can you give us another $30,000? That could very well happen. That's committing a lot of money to a very small number of people in what is not a state operated, what is not a licensed SILA. This is a private home, okay, that is using public and private money. And it's
experimental. I like to think of it as not only are we benefiting those adults that are in the SILA, but the benefit that we are providing to their family members. Those extended families is huge. It's very difficult to measure. So I don't think it's quite as narrow as that, but we'll kind of cross these bridges when we come to it. What I understand, but is that there are some families that want to get their kid into that 4th room, but it's very challenging to make sure that it's a match where everybody's going to work together. So hopefully they're on top of that and they're being equitable in how they're trying to go about doing
well, we'll see. It's been a year and a half now.
My concern is the woman that operates that. And what happens if something happens to her, God forbid?
She's the glue that holds
Yeah,
it
exactly.
together.
You know, I mean, and I'm sure that that's something that's on the mind of the parents also, and the family members. Because that's some heavy dedication to do what she does, and she's so enthusiastic all the time.
And have they done any kind of, back when I was liaison for that committee, we had talked to them about doing outreach to other families on how they could set up similar programs. Have they done any of that?
I couldn't say it. I don't think that came up when we talked to them.
They talked about setting up a home for women.
Okay.
That would be the next project, would be a home for women. I'd like to have a home for them, but
Mhm.
the fact that they can't fill that fourth spot. And part of that's the dynamics of the individuals in there, that those three are pretty connected. And for a third person or a fourth person to come into that, they found it a difficult match, but
Right.
that's what they talked about, was to go and open up facilities for women.
What about simply being the training and the, almost like consultants for other families who want mentors to set up similar, just to let other groups, because didn't they come out of Our Place in Nature, right? So, other groups of friends from those organizations who, because I know the SILA waiting list is nuts, right?
They've had a
We're not
really hard
hearing-
time finding, even getting people to come over and take a look at the house. It's, family has to come up with
Yes.
quite a bit of money. There's some people using the home-based Medicaid waivers to fund part of it, but still, it's gonna require a family to come up with, probably $10,000 a year.
It's still transition with COVID too. Would you want to put somebody into a house and you're not sure of the safety procedure? So, I think the next year is gonna be very challenging and interesting a year from now to see, where we are with them. They're doing some, obviously valuable work.
Because it's 3 men in this house, you're basically already eliminating 50% of the population. It really wouldn't function to be one woman and 3 men. It's like, most SILAs are either all men or all women.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you both for being here, everyone.
Yes, we do. Thank you again to all of our volunteers.
That's nice, yeah.
We really could not do this process without you. So for trustees, at our next meeting, we will vote on whether to accept those recommendations and make any changes to the recommendations as a part of the budget process. Okay. All right, acknowledgement of staff reports. We have received reports from our Community Services Administrator, Brian Leverett, from Community Services Administrator, June Rosner, and our Community and Support Services Associate, Julie Quinnenberger, including a copy of our newest courier, which I hope you all received in the mail. And thank you so much for all your hard work on that. I know it was a labor of love. And you had to deal with me a lot.
I thought it looked great and I like that savings too.
Yep, I think it's beautiful. I've had multiple kindergartners ask me to sign it. So it's getting out there. Not sure they know what's going on.
Any questions before I leave? Or-
Any other questions for Brian on his report?
Thank you so
Brian,
much.
Thank you so much, Brian.
All right.
Thank you so
I
much.
think we would appreciate if you come to the next meeting, just in case we do have additional questions as we make our determination.
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Thank you, we appreciate
All
it.
right.
Anything that anyone wants to discuss from those staff reports? And you saw the numbers from our winter holiday giveaways were all up significantly from previous years, especially compared to pre-pandemic, but also compared to last year. So I think that was also due to a decrease in state and federal funding that have come to an end now. All right. New business.
I have one item I'd just like to ask you.
I don't believe it's in order to add for
Well,
the
I
administrator to add.
think it's regarding the situation that took place last week. When you and I had a conversation, and I was discussing my position. And
Could you keep your mask on, please?
We're just trying to take my glasses. And I feel the conversation we had, Gail, was unexpected. I think it was just something that you were, in essence, were threatening my position. You indicated that you wanted to reduce my salary and that you wanted to transfer fundamental responsibilities that I have and that I've had for 18 years in my position. And that in reducing the salary, the logic that you at least expressed was that you were able to then transfer those dollars to a staff person who is considerably younger than I. Having not given me any kind of forewarning to this or any kind of discussion, because we don't have discussions. You'll email me when I'm sitting, in the office there. I just think it's important that the board knows that I felt threatened. And I believe you're trying to intimidate me. And it's something that to me is bothersome, given the service that I've had and the amount of years that I've had. And that would be something I would like to have at least, the board to know that. I think I have an obligation to show that.
Thank you. I appreciate you, your 18 years of service. At this,
I'm not asking you to appreciate the service. I'm just saying that I think it's important because this is something that hasn't been, this was just in essence, something we've never even addressed before. We've never met before. We've done here, and I know you indicated that for 4 years when you were a trustee, there were certain things, but nothing was ever addressed. And I feel threatened, and I think as my position and as my livelihood, and I think that that's something that needs to be considered.
At this time, I'd like to move that this board move into executive session pursuant to 5 ILCS 122C1 in order to discuss employment compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees.
And I should be excused.
Well, we have a second.
Second.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? We're now in executive session.
Then I'll excuse.
We will be recording a verbatim record per the statutes, but I will close the recording at this